Shabbat Shalom. Um, James was talking about Yuval, and what is interesting is that he said that she's not a professional singer, right? Uh, and it's interesting that the name Yuval is mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned in Genesis 4, and it's the name of a man, and that man in the Bible is considered the father of those who play harp and organ. Right? So pretty much the father of the musicians. And sounds like a prophecy, right? Even though she wasn't a professional singer, um, she was there representing the people of God. And we're counting the Omer, right? I realized that not many people, starting by myself, I'm not very familiar with the counting of the Omer is. And then I think this week or last week I find out what it actually means. I was like, is it just a Jewish tradition? Is it in the Bible? It is in the Bible. God tells us to count the Omer, and the counting of the Omer starts in Passover, and then you count 50 days to Shavuot, as known as Pentecost as well, right? And I was like, and why is that important? And it's important because Shavuot, the Pentecost, is exactly when God gives His law to the people of Israel. And for us believers, it's more special because it's also when the Holy Spirit comes over the apostles. So for us, it's double special, right? So today is the day 41 of the counting of the Omer, which means that in 9 days, Shavuot happens, a very special date. Let's go to the message. So the message is, the title that I gave is YESHUA'S YOVEL. The word Yovel in Hebrew is what in English we say Jubilee, right? And it's based on the portion of this week, Behar Bechukotai, it's a double portion. And the two of them are the last portion of the book of Leviticus, that in Hebrew we call Vaikra. So we're finishing the book of Leviticus. The Jews around the world are studying the same portion, and when we finish each book of the Torah, usually we cheer each other by saying Chazak Chazak Venit Chazik, which means be strong, and may we be strengthened. Right, we finish one more book. All right? So from this portion, I chose, I hope this every time I struggle a little bit with this, I hope this works now. It does. So the verse, I chose two verses to base this message today. And let me read them for you. Leviticus 25, verses 9 and 10 says, "Then you shall sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month." The 7th month of the biblical calendar, so that happens somewhere there in the fall. On the day of atonement, which is the Yom Kippur, you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a Yovel for you. When each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. When I was reading this passage with Rika at home, I just love those two words that I highlighted there, proclaim liberty. They caught my attention, and that's interesting because when we are worshiping by the third song, Rika turned to me and said, "He's singing your message today." Right? We sang, in the songs that we sang today, we already sang about proclaiming liberty. These are the songs of injustice and pain. Come like you promise. And a different song we sang earlier, it says, to take back and restore what belongs to the Lord. Right? And those two words there, proclaim liberty, they remind me of a different verse in the Bible. In the book of the prophet YESHUA, 61, the first verse says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound." The song that we sang earlier, right? And that verse also reminds me of another verse in Luke chapter 4. We're going to get to that one later. Before going there, inspired by these beautiful words, I decided to share a beautiful picture with you. Thank you. We took that picture around 2 months ago, and there's so many beautiful things about this picture. The first one is the bride, of course. The dress that she chose. Also my talit. It's a beautiful talit. The prayer shawl, right? Everything is beautiful. The sand was beautiful. The clouds were beautiful. It was sunny and partially cloud. I know that you guys love the sun. I love the clouds. So God gave me that as a gift, like a chuppah covering our wedding, right? That was beautiful. That mountain back there, beautiful. This shirt as well, I got there in the Philippines. And there's also a good-looking guy standing there. I'm not talking about me. It's the other good-looking guy standing at the back. Let me show you a closer picture so you guys can see him. That's him. That's Tristan Klassen. He's a very dear friend of us. I came to Canada in 2019, and I did an internship program at Camp Konos. Tristan Klassen is one of the directors there, and he was my mentor when I was intern. And again, a very dear friend, so dear that he and his wife flew from Vancouver Island all the way to the Philippines to celebrate our wedding, right? And this almost 6 years that I'm here in Canada, Tristan and I always bring up verses in the Bible, theological discussions. We love talking about the Bible, and you know those difficult questions that people usually avoid. Tristan and I don't, right? We love talking about them. And a few weeks ago, Tristan actually texted me an interesting question, one of those hard questions to answer. I was a little bit surprised because this time the question wasn't it wasn't exactly a biblical question. It was more like social or political question. Tristan went to a Bible college graduation, right? And as you guys know, in many public ceremonies, you do the acknowledgement of the land belonging to the indigenous people. And then Tristan texted me asking me what I think about that, because Rick and I have been working with indigenous people, Judy as well. I don't know where she is right now. But yeah, we work in the same program. And so he was curious to know what I think about the acknowledgement of the land. Before going there, I forgot to mention what the Jubilee means. Let me clarify what the Jubilee means, if you're wondering. The Jubilee would happen every 49 years. The following year would be the year that slaves would be set free, and that the land would return to the original owners, right? So, for example, let's say that I had a land, and let's say that James is going to buy my land. It's interesting because the price for the land would be based on how many years left to the Jubilee. For example, if we still had like 40 years left to the year of the Jubilee, James would pay a really high price because he was paying for 40 years of using the land. But if it's just 5 years left to the Jubilee, he would pay cheaper for the land because he would use only for 5 years, right? So let's say that I want to spend the next 5 years in the Philippines just enjoying vacations there. I would sell my land to James, and then 5 years later, I could come back and the land would return to me. That's the year of the Jubilee, right? Unfortunately, I don't think people did that in Israel to spend vacation somewhere else. Usually they would sell the land because they didn't have resources to plant, they didn't have conditions, or because they had a debt to pay. Usually, not for good reasons, they would sell the land. And that's why God established this right of return to the land. So the people who, for a period, needed some money, they would go back to the inheritance of the family that God established, right? And that reminds me a little bit of the recognition of the land in public ceremonies. I confess that I was very hesitant to talk about it because I don't want to be political here, right? And the whole week I was struggling about that and talking to Rick, and then yesterday I was talking to God, and I felt in my heart that I could proceed and talk about it. My intention was just to make this an introduction, but if it's an introduction, it will take a little longer than a regular introduction. Anyway, even though Tristan's question wasn't exactly biblical, I made my answer biblical. And I told him, I cannot stand with the Jews and the right of the Jews to return to the original land where they were kicked out 2,000 years ago if I don't stand with the indigenous people who had their land stolen only 200 years ago. But I understand the question. I confess that when I came to Canada and I heard that, I was like, wow, that's interesting. But I found that strange as well. What does it mean, right? One of the questions is how effective it is. I'm not going to discuss that here today on this mic, right? And also, what does it mean? What does it mean for who is not indigenous? Does it mean that we have to leave? Does it mean that I have to go back to Brazil? Does it mean that Rick has to go back to the Philippines? I have no problem with that part. I would go back to the Philippines. But does it mean that you have to go back to Zimbabwe? Right? What does it mean for who is not indigenous? I cannot answer that, but I want to share someone who could answer that. This is a book called White Man's Gospel, written by Pastor Craig Smith. Craig Smith is an indigenous pastor. If I'm not wrong, he's Ojibwe. Either he or his wife is Ojibwe. I think he's Ojibwe, his wife is Navajo. And he wrote this book, and it's a very interesting book. He shares his struggle as indigenous pastor. Because if you're indigenous and you become a believer, usually the community will reject you. Right? Why are you believing in the white man's religion? And right in the beginning of the book, Pastor Craig, he says it's not a white man's religion. It starts with a brown guy from the Middle East, right? And he uses Israel a lot as example in this book, and he stands with the right, with Israel's right, right? And but there is a very interesting thing at some point later in the book. I don't have the physical copy. I read the book, but I had to return the book, so I cannot quote exactly the words. So I'm trying to remember. But I do remember this. Pastor Craig quotes another indigenous leader that wrote this probably 100 to 200 years ago. And this indigenous leader, he said, the indigenous people see the land, see the earth as a mother. Right? And I myself, when I lived with my parents, I would always show up at home with a friend, uninvited. I didn't announce, I just showed up with a friend. And my mom would always put some more rice, cook one more piece of meat for my friend, even though they didn't even know that he would show up there. And I didn't only do that with friends, I did that with pets as well. Once I show up with 2 turtles, one dog, never asked, never announced, I just show up at home. I showed up with a bunny as well, and the worst of them, a rat. Yes, you know those white laboratory rats? It was a clean one, and I just brought home, and my mom was, what is this? Right? And actually, I think my mom and the rat had a better relationship than me and the rat. The rat liked my mom more than me. I used to shower, give a bath to the rat, okay? But anyway, let's forget the pets. Let's think about friends. If I brought friends home, my mom would cook for them as well. And she wouldn't complain. And this indigenous leader, he said, this land that feeds us can feed the newcomers as well. Can feed the Europeans come to this land. The problem that this indigenous leader says is, the problem was when the settlers divided the land and sold. And they say, who on earth would split your mom and sell the parts? Well, the earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it, belongs to the Lord. Psalm 24, verse 1. There is a very interesting verse in Deuteronomy 32 that I'm sure that many people read it, and maybe we never paid close attention to what it says. But it's a very interesting secret. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations the inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. And you have two interesting things. One is according to the number of the sons of Israel. That's a secret that I'm not super sure what it means. So I'm not discussing that today. But the other secret there is that the Most High was the one who fixed the borders of the peoples. And I'm not talking about the geopolitical borders that we have right now, not exactly the border between Canada and the States. Rika was a little bit surprised when we were passing by Tuasen once, and I said, oh, see Point Roberts? That's the States. And she was surprised why a piece of land is so disconnected from the rest of the country. And every time that we pass there and we see the sign, we say, what is the point, Roberts? Right, so I'm not talking about those borders. But yes, those are also authorized by our God. He was the one who fixed the borders of the peoples. And he was the one who established the lands and which way which family should go. And also the times that they should spend there. Right? Israel, when Israel was going to the promised land, God said, look, there is a people living there. And they live in violence. They live in injustice. They're cruel. And that's why the land is vomiting them out. And it's interesting because actually that people was living there. The Canaanites were living there since Abraham. And God told Abraham, look, I will give this land to you. The people who live in this land now, they are disobedient. They are cruel. And I will kick them out of this land. But that's interesting because God only did that 300-400 years later. God gave time to that people to repent. But they didn't. Right? And when Israel was going to the land, God says, the land is yours. Don't do what they did. If you do the same thing, if you offer your children as sacrifice to strange gods, if you're cruel, it's interesting. When you read those verses, you find that God has laws even for the animals, right? Against cruelty, against the animals. And God says, if you do this to the animals, if you do this to your children, if you do this to the land will vomit you out as well. And we know what happened. Israel was disobedient. Israel offered the children to strange gods as sacrifice, human sacrifice. Israel didn't give rest to the land, and God set a time, and they were exiled out of the land. And the Babylonians came and took over. And the Bible says that God actually chose those strange people to punish Israel. He did choose them. And it's also interesting that I was like, okay, I chose you, but you guys are going too much. You guys are being too cruel. And God also punished those strange people who were too cruel. Let's go back to our verse. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, or yovel for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. When I highlight this part, return to his clan, that also reminds me of another difficult question. Many Jews out there, when it comes to Yeshua as Messiah, they have two main questions, like why they don't believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. First of all, Yeshua is the Messiah. Yeshua is the Messiah of Israel. But those Jews, they have this question. The Messiah is supposed, according to the Bible, according to the promises, the Messiah is supposed to bring the 12 tribes of Israel back to the land. And unfortunately, that didn't happen yet. And also the Messiah is supposed to promote peace on earth. And unfortunately, there's still war happening there. So that's the struggle of many Jews out there when it comes to Yeshua as Messiah. And I think that those questions are important, they're valid. And for us as believers, for us who had an encounter, a personal encounter with Yeshua, and for us who know that Yeshua is the Messiah, how do we answer those questions? Well, I will answer the same thing that Stephen answered in Acts 7. When Stephen was caught before being stoned, Stephen says, just like Israel, just like the Hebrews rejected Moses. Remember when Moses went down to check out how the Hebrews are doing, and to protect the Hebrews, he murdered an Egyptian? But the next day he went there again and the Hebrews just rejected him. Who put you as our prince, our ruler? Stephen says the same way that Moses was rejected, and only 40 years later he returned to rescue Israel. The same way you guys are rejecting the Messiah, and he will return to finally rescue, and all Israel will be saved. But it's interesting, it's a valid question. And several times when you read the Gospels, you find Yeshua telling his disciples, go and find the lost sheep of Israel, because it is his job. It is the Messiah's job. And as one of the songs that we sang today says, the bride is going, preparing the way for the Messiah. It is our job, and it's happening. In the last years, it's happening more and more. Yeshua is bringing back the lost tribes of Israel back to the land. 1917, Balfour Declaration, when the British declared that Israel has the right to return to the land. 1949 and 1950, Operation Magic Carpet, when Israel brought a lot of Jews from Yemen back to Israel after centuries in Yemen. In the 90s, the Iranian Jews, after the Islamic Revolution, they started going back to the land of Israel. Later in the 90s, also the Bnei Menashe, Jews living in India for centuries and centuries, over 2,000 years. They finally went back to Israel. 1984, Operation Moses. There are some movies about some of these events. I recommend searching them. The Operation Moses brought around 8,000 Jews from Ethiopia back to Israel. And 1991 Operation Solomon again brought twice that number from Ethiopia back to Israel. And there's a bunch more. So many Jews. And there's also those, at least, they had records that they were Jews. Either the traditions or writings showed that they're Jews, so those could be traced. But there's many more that don't have records anymore. They only have the Jewish soul. And I know that many of us are here today for that reason. Because Yeshua is calling our hearts. Many of us didn't even know that we are Jewish descendants. And then at some point in our life, we learned that we are. And He is calling us back. On the matter of peace, the Messiah is supposed to bring peace. It's true. There's a lot of wars out there. And unfortunately, throughout the centuries, many even did wars in the name of God. Those are in trouble when Yeshua is back. Those who started wars in His name are in trouble. But everywhere the gospel message went, it also brought liberty. Several people, several nations, several tribes in Europe, Africa, Asia, South America. When the first missionaries arrived there, they found tribes burying their children alive just because they were born without a hand or without a leg. Many tribes, many peoples around the world that would kill the twins just because they believed that one of them was evil. Cannibals, headhunters. Many people are not familiar with headhunters tribes. There are tribes that they don't eat human flesh, but they would still hunt someone to chop the head and offer that head to the spirits. And when the gospel arrived to those lands, the gospel finally brought peace. No more murdering, no more children sacrifice. So yes, in the name of Yeshua, those missionaries went there, and they finally brought peace to those peoples, nations, and tribes everywhere in the globe. But we still have wars happening. But He's soon coming back. Soon we are going to hear the loud trumpet. And soon we're going to see Yeshua on the clouds. And peace will finally come. Just like King David was anointed king. But only in Solomon's reign, we finally had peace. Solomon, the second in David's dynasty. The same way, in Yeshua's second come, we will finally have peace. Now we go to Luke 4:18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. That's how Jesus started His ministry. This is His first sermon recorded by Luke. Yeshua says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And I want to go back to the indigenous case here in Vancouver Island, Canada. This is also why Yeshua came. Because God allowed us to be here with one goal: to bring the good news to these people as well. To proclaim the good news to the poor, Jewish or non-Jew, white or indigenous, Latino, Filipino, to proclaim liberty and to announce the year of the Lord's favor, when he will finally come and bring peace forever. Amen.